What's going on, YouTube? Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Texas Street Stories, where we talk about what happens on these Texas streets. And if you haven't already subscribed, help your boy out and hit the subscribe button. On today's episode, we're going to be continuing on Robert Delgado, also known as Bad Bob or Malo, Chapter 2 of The Unmaking of a Criminal Mind. September 1974. We had come together on the prison chain bus from all parts of Texas. The white urban rednecks, the blacks from the ghettos, and the Chicanos from the barrios. All were poor, none were rich. It isn't that rich people don't get in trouble. They frequently do, and do some four crimes worse than what some people are in prison for. But the truth is that money and influence can buy justice and alibis too. This was not a tour bus going by the site of the deadly 1974 Fred Gomez Carrasco prison break, nor had we come to attend a Cinco de Mayo celebration or a Juneteenth festival, nor a Ku Klux Klan rally either. We didn't leave the world behind to go to prison because we wanted to. We had to. We had been forcibly brought together in steel wrist and leg bracelets on the prison chain bus to one of the dozen sore spots scattered around Texas. Prison. A place that stood for more than just imprisonment and a loss of freedom, but a loss of privacy and sanity. Some of us going to prison for the first time, others for the second or third time, and still others for the last time. The devil's playground is some would die of old age, or simply be brutally murdered. Chained together in pairs, the racist blacks and rednecks have set aside their differences for the moment, as like brothers shared cigarettes to ease their nerves. Flinching by habit, when white skin accidentally rubbed against black skin, a common tragedy had brought them together and chained deuces. Hearts pounding against chest and bows and knots, I looked around me to read the thoughts that were running rampant with the criminal minds. There was fear, unashamedly open fear, and controlled fear that was hidden behind small clouds of cigarette smoke. They were not to be afraid, but the mound of cigarette butts at their feet told a different story. We all wanted to get to our new home. After hours of riding uncomfortably, every freedom painter who had made the unpleasant bug trip several times served as a guide tour, announcing every 15 minutes where we were and how much further we had to travel. Each announcement making the newcomers who had never been to prison before peer out of the eyes of the bus. Then came the final announcement. There it is. We all stared at the place, suddenly not too sure that we wanted to get there, but it was all too late for that. It was that place many of us had heard from our mothers when we did something wrong. The place from which some would never leave alive, where all of us would see violence and do things we have never thought possible just a few days before. The place had a primitive look to it that we would soon learn what went well the Stone Age mentality of those that ran the place. Suddenly the ignition key turned, stopping the engine but making hearts race faster and bolts loosen from nervousness. A line quickly formed at the latrine. That was it. We had merely entered another part of Texas, but an alien part where tracking dogs, corrupt guards, serial killers, and gun towers were all part of this four-block planet. We were now officially the property of the state of Texas. We would no longer retain our identities. We left our names at the back gate. We had just become numbers. 24, 38, 81 was my tag. All we individually retained now was our souls. But for some who would later lose that too, at 19 years old, on this cool September morning of 1974, I exited the chain bus to step for the first time on prison ground. The only music echoing through the silent, muted southern morning was the clattering sound of steel-toed bracelets and the deep twangs from frogs that were announcing her arrival. You boys are either going to fight or wind up being somebody's punk, a chubby Reckner guard sneered at from above a 40-foot gun tower as he pointed with his chin. We all turned to see the indicated direction, and I saw 4 muscle-built prisoners strolling out of the building to meet us. They were wearing prison issue whites, but the green jackets they had the word trusty stenciled on the back in big bold white letters. There was something else. All 4 were armed. The dark stains on the battling ends of their small Louisville baseball bats. For those that didn't know it then, it was all dried blood. The dark stains on the battling end of the small Louisville baseball bats. For those that didn't know it then, it was dried blood of past victims of brutality. These were the prisoners' administrators hired guns. The inmates turned guards, known as building tenders, or as we call them in Spanish, marranos, pigs. The building tender leading the pack planted his feet wide apart and placed both of his huge hands on his hips as a gunslinger would do before a showdown. The showdown was in the making. It had taken almost a century, but unbeknownst to everybody, the building tender challenge had begun to arrive in bits and pieces all across the Texas prison system. Nobody here was going to hold your hand and guide you safely across the catwalk and tuck you into bed. Not that it never happened, occasionally it did, but among the homosexuals. Everybody else had to learn to hold their own, heads above the water or drown. For within these 4 walls of coiled wire and concrete lived the sadistic predators of human flesh. The building tenders were mostly white inmates, authorized by the wardens to carry weapons and order prisoners around. They had their own gang colors, black combat boots and green jackets with the word trustee splashed across the back in bold white letters. They openly packed small Louisville sluggers and free world knives as sidearms. The state-armed building tenders had been around since the early 1900s. Besides being the man's eyes and ears, their responsibilities included torture and intimidation ranging from burning cigars on prisoners' hides to testicle plumbings to outright murder. It was intimidation at its best. The building tenders were the bosses, and they were willing to kill it to prove it. They had done it before, and they would do it again if given the chance. Like the dogs that they were, the building tenders often rode on their owner's leg. The building tenders had prostituted themselves to the all-white administration at cost to their fellow prisoners. But to the administration's pleasure, there were also those who wouldn't prostitute themselves for any price. Those very few fighting back were alone, divided and without power. They were just numbers, dreaming that they could become a difference, like they few in every generation before them. The problem, each generation had been too disorganized to make a collective move. The building tenders was pride lived up on their nicknames that went along with their appearances or brutal reputations. One building tender was known as Death, another as the Undertaker, yet another as Evil. Their names should not have been legion because they were so many. But where there is evil, there are always those who will resist its temptation. Within my first 30 days in prison, I would cut up a guy using razors to attach to an ice cream stick. I didn't hang my principles at the prison back gate when I stepped through it. If anything, I would welcome any challenge that stood before me. Arriving in the prison system back in the early 1970s was like coming upon a horrific traffic accident where you could get involved in fighting the building tenders who were highly organized, stand there watching paralyzed with fear, too scared to make a move or turn a blind eye, and walk away with your head still on your shoulders. With death still before us, many had turned a blind eye. The prisoners at the top of the administration hit list were the paralegals, or writ writers, as they are known in prison. The administration was not about to start an investigation on itself, but they felt threatened by people like myself, who would become as good or better than some seasoned lawyers. If prisoners were not complaining, then the courts and the public would get the impression that there was nothing wrong with the system. But there were many unpleasant things to talk and write about that were about this place. But all our letters, even those to our lawyers and politicians, were read by the administration to make sure we were saying the right things. That prison was like a summer resort, and that the guards were like big brothers looking over us. Yeah, right. We smuggled letters out, but they fell on deaf ears. As lawmakers, politicians, even the governors were known for letting prison administration know about the content of our smuggled letters. Then the unfortunate complaint would get a visit, and it wouldn't be the governor caliber either, but a very angry horde of building tenders. So many wrote down past and current events that the administration would have been believing things had happened and not as the individual recalled them. Nobody was listening, not the governor, not the politicians, who would later claim before the public that they did not know of these horrible things that had happened on their watch. The big players at the Capitol in Austin, including the ones in Huntsville, had a lot to lose if through exposure, through the media and the courts, the public's attention was drawn to the massive corruption where hundreds of millions of dollars were at stake. The big players, through exposure, would lose everything in order to account for the massive theft of funds. The theft of tons of state-owned machinery, surplus crops, and frozen meat, the theft of pigs, cattle, and horses, the illegal practice of using inmates as guards, the illegal practice of providing free prison labor by contracting inmate labor to outside businesses, the illegal practices of awarding prison construction contracts to their own privately owned companies, the illegal practices of placing the prisoners' commissary money in their own Huntsville personal bank accounts and keeping the millions of dollars garnered in interest for themselves. Other criminal laws were being violated by local prosecutors who were not prosecuting. There were countless thefts and illegalities of yet nobody that was in government position could do something about it or care to hear about it. This was organized crime at its finest. It was the government that ran the black market, the big players that were seeking to protect at any price, by any means, including murder. The big players had muzzled the prisoners as they did their horses. It was their show, a monstrous government conspiracy to keep the public in the blind. By an uninformed campaign that would later rifle the public itself, blaming the jailhouse lords for everything, the jailhouse lords would be the most convenient scapegoats, while the real criminals, laughing all the way to the bank, empty the taxpayers' and wallets. The real beneficiaries of the prison reform efforts would have become the taxpayers, since it was the footing of the bill recovering the huge financial losses. It was corrections that was held before the public, but under the cloak of correction stood corruption. The Texas governor was dumb, a liar, or both when he denied that the building tenders existed. Only much later, while under heavy public scrutiny, did the governor admit that they did in fact exist, but even then claimed that the building tenders were merely janitors. The only difference between the building tenders and the mostly white guards were the colors of the uniforms. If not for that difference, I would have been unable to tell the difference between the criminals in white and those in gray, who themselves were functioning like a gang of criminals. A sign by the sliding front pass gate read, "Welcome through these gates, past TDC's finest officers." Yeah, right. I knew better. There was no women guards. Peppered here and there amongst the salt would be a token of black or Hispanic guard. The very few guards were basically all redneck Germans. They all had a racist attitude toward anybody, not the right skin color, and they didn't need a high school diploma or a GED. For a job that didn't require an IQ higher than 60, if they could manually crank open cell doors, ride a horse, or beat prisoners down, they had a job. They also demanded respect and expected to call them boss. To them, slavery had never ended. They were getting respect at the local bar, so they came to prison to get it by force. To survive, the guards looked up to the building tenders as their protectors, just like a child looks up to his father. The guards couldn't even enter a cell block without the building tender's permission, and when they did enter a cell block, they were always escorted by a horde of building tender bodyguards. The building tenders ran the place, totally and unquestionably. The cell blocks were segregated by race. The blacks had their cell blocks, and the whites and Hispanics shared theirs. The blacks had their work squads, and we had ours. The blacks ate on their side of the chow hall, and we ate ours. The building tender doorman that opened the cell block door made me wonder how I had gotten so deep in trouble so fast, but the answer was almighty simple, one step at a time. The building tender doorman happened to be a 300-pound, 6'5" tall man with blue eyes and blonde hair, a man with the Nazi swastika tatted on his chest, a man that had cut off the head of his cheating girlfriend and her dog. Why? I wondered. If all the building tenders had the keys to the place, weren't they attempting to escape? Freedom, I soon would learn, was chilling to thought to many of the building tenders had become institutionalized. To them, the outside world did not exist. Besides, prison life had been good to the building tenders. They had found their place in life and were not about to run away from it. Each cell block had a 6-inch letter printed at the entrance door, A through P, then preceded by numbers as if someone had only known the alphabet up to the letter P. Each cell block had its own name that gave you a good idea of what to expect. There was the House of Horrors, the House of Pain, and many other names. The House of the Klansmen was for cell block F. No black faces in the crowd. The Klansman cell block was off limits to the black guards too, and no black guard dared to find what would happen if he entered. The guards had seen more than enough to convince them that their gray uniforms were just that, a uniform, and not a presidential passport. The rag doll of a black man dancing in the wind from a Christmas tree with the hangman noose tied around his black and racial slogans of the wall served as a warning to the blacks. The dark red stains on the building tender's Louisville Slugger was proof, ladies and gentlemen, that this was no bad joke. This was no Miss Rosa Parks here that was going to cross the white line to make it an issue. The building tenders had their unwritten rules. Those for them and those for the prisoners they ruled over. Do not talk in the day room, but whisper. Do not smile. Someone says you are making fun of him and want to fight. Do not whistle or blink an eye. Some homosexual belonging to a building tender will lie that you made a pass on him and you will be beaten. Do not share a cup of coffee or a secret. Friendship and generosity were against the rules. Do not sing. Someone will put a jacket on you that you're gay. Do not walk down the highway too fast nor too slow. You will arouse someone's suspicion, just like a black person would in a white suburb. Do not wave. Someone can make a report to the building that you are shooting them the bird or did a power hand sign. Do not greet any prisoner. Any harmless affair that gave the appearance of organized activity was perceived as a threat to the building tenders. Do not be caught with the Bible, and do not show your emotions. Instead, hide both, including your God. The devil's playground was a place where evil imaginations ran wild and the criminal minds of the paranoid. Thinking was a serious crime. Nobody was to think for himself, because thinking too much could produce ideas of rebellion. So court opinions involving prison litigation were cut out from the law library books. Destroying the idea of lawsuits that were a threat to this dictatorial society, the building tenders had learned from the Nazi dictator Hitler that to control the masses, You had to silence the educated and wise. As Hitler would put it, if they can count up to 100, murder them. So the building tenders did all you thinking for you. They would tell you where to sit in the chow hall to eat your meal. When you were done, even though you had yet to eat, starting your meal. The building tenders were running the chow hall traffic so they could go back to watching their sports or soap operas on their TVs. So eat on your way to your assigned seat. The few extra seconds might be all the time you get. They would tell you when you would get showered and when you were finished by shutting off the water. While at work, they would tell you when you could just drink water and the amount you could drink, as if it was being rationed out, which it wasn't. They just wanted you to know that they ran the place. The law of survival was to be mechanical and brain dead. But my brainstorms made me far from brain dead. No solid convict wanted to hear this, but only a few, like myself, would dare break the cycle of conformity while the building tenders were holding their baseball bats ready to bake up their arguments. The building tenders' thick necks, massive shoulders, and barrel chests gave them the weightlifters' appearance. Men their size, coupled with authority they possessed and weaponry they carried, gave them the sense of being invulnerable. But the veteran BTs knew better. They had been around long enough to know that their size and weaponry had not protected the BTs, had lost their lives from a convict determined to take it. A shank in Shorty's hand, and things would quickly balance out. The experienced convicts knew that that to protect themselves, they had to repress their emotions and opinions. Building tenders, informants were everywhere. Many building tenders made the mistake of taking this silence for acceptance and submission. 10 on 1 had convinced many of my fellow prisoners into really believing that the buildings were unbeatable. But there were still those within the few that would stand up to the building tenders.